good evening, good night, wherever you're down in from. Appreciate you down in for another one of our videos. Forgive me for my voice. I've been a bit under the weather this past week, so I'm trying to get this cough and this stuff out my throat. But we'll get through this real quick. I'll try not to take too long. So we're looking at session 10, trust. And what we're looking at is last week we saw where Gideon was called by God. People were still sinning. People were still getting caught in the traps of sin, and then they would be conquered and driven into slavery, and then they would cry out with God again. So we just see this cycle that the people were going through, and they would always call out to God whenever they were in trouble, right? So knowing that, God heard their cries, even though he was mad at them, he would still take steps to help them and deliver them in the form of judges. And that's why we're looking at this. So, in the book, and during this time, it's like 300-year period, and there's 12 judges that God would use. So, and if we look at the last lesson, Gideon was not comfortable and he wasn't confident in himself. Remember, he told he's told God, he's like, look here, I'm one of the weakest families in the tribe, and he did nothing to extinguish himself. He didn't consider himself a blessed or godly person. He probably was an ordinary man like me and you. So he questioned why God would come to him, but God was unfazed in his lack of faith, and God was unfazed in his hesitation, right? And so God stuck with him and said, "Look, I'm gonna give you victory because I'm gonna do it, and you're gonna conquer your enemies as if they were one man." So we're getting into that today. So first question: why do stories of people rising from humble circumstances to achieve success resonate so strongly with us? Well, I think that when we look at stories of people coming from humble beginnings, that gives us inspiration, motivation, and it shows that we can do it too. And when we look at the American dream, it's easy for us to look at, the big families, the rich families, the wealthy families that constantly from generation to generation pass down wealth, right? Well, that's a different story. But you take someone who comes, an immigrant or something like that comes to our country, embraces our values, and for the most part, build themselves up pull themselves up from their bootstraps, so to speak. It's pretty profound, and it gives us inspiration. It shows us that hard work will get us where we want to go. And that's why it resonates with us, because we can see where it was possible for them. It's also possible with us. So, yeah. So when we look at the Bible, seeing where God uses ordinary men and women, that kind of shows us that, hey, God uses us as well, right? Awesome stuff. All right, so let's get into this. Judges, Judges chapter 7, verses 1 through 3. Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all the troops who were with him got up early and camped beside the spring of Harod. The camp of Midian was north of them, below the hill of Morah, in the valley. The Lord said to Gideon, "You have too many troops for me to hand the Midianites over to them, or else Israel might elevate themselves over me and say, 'I saved myself.' Now announce to the troops, whoever is fearful and trembling may turn back and leave Mount Gilead." So 20,000 of the troops turned back, but 10,000 remain. Okay, so let's look at what's leading up to this, shall we? So we're kind of seeing what's going on. So last week, Gideon was called. He had questions. He had doubts. Now, looking at chapter 6, the chapter before this, Gideon was asking for signs and assurances that God was calling him. So he tested him with the fleece. One day he said, "Hey, with the morning dew, have the dew on, the ground, but not the fleece." And then the next day it'd be the opposite. So, that kind of stuff. He was asking for God's blessing, and he was trying to see if this is truly, what God wanted to do. And God was patient, and he met those. So with both of those signs confirmed, Gideon got up early from the camp. He gathered all the troops, and he assembled the tribes of Manasseh, Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, and he brought them all together, right? So, they had a pretty good bit. They had a lot going on here, right? And you would think that more numbers, the best, the better, right? But God's like, wow, you got too many people. Wow, So, and he told him, he said, look, if anybody doesn't want to be here, send them home, right? I mean, how many times have you seen that? I mean, there's been plenty of times when I'm at work, a supervisor, or I would tell employees sometimes, look, if you don't want to be here, go home, because they're belly aching, they're complaining, or whatever the case may be. Hey, you don't want to be here, go home, that kind of stuff, right? And so some of these people were genuinely afraid. They've been caught in this cycle of violence, apostasy, and slavery and deliverance, and they keep falling back into it. So their heart may not be in it. And God's like, all these people are going to do is those people who are afraid and who won't do anything, those people, the soldiers in the back, they're going to take credit for this. And I'm not going to allow that. So that was a reason for him doing this. And surprisingly, 22,000 said, you know what, that's a good idea. I think I'll go home. And they probably walked down the hill saying, I got crops I got to grow. I got to, my daughter, she's getting older, or we got to go here. Everybody had an excuse why. No one would admit the fact that they were probably scared. So, but he did ask them, if you're fearful and trembling, you may turn around and leave, and they probably justified, well, I don't want to die today. Let them die. So anyway, so that's part of the culling of what's going on here. So that left, 10,000 soldiers. And that's still a pretty good number back in those days. Looking at the question, has anyone ever asked you to do something that seemed outrageous and not doable? Oh, wow. I haven't had that asked in a while because I think a lot of people know I'm not going to do it. So, friends used to ask me all kinds of impossible things, and I'd ask them sometimes. But, there have been moments of emergency where I've called friends and they were there for me. And I'd break down somewhere and, hey, I need a lift or I need to get a new battery. Can you help me out? I would think that, I'd probably have to sit there a while, but 15, 20 minutes later, they would show up. And it's that kind of friendship that inspires me to make sure that I make myself ready to my friends as well. So anyway, it probably doesn't really answer that question, but that's what comes to mind. Another question, in what ways might we try to do God's work by our own might and for our own glory? Just about all the times. A lot of times we get motion in the way of what God wants us to do. A lot of times we get fanatical and we get motivated by our own self-interest, thinking, okay, we're doing God's work. And it may not be the way God wants it done. So that does happen. And we try to, we look at what we feel this is the right thing to do, and it may be the right thing to do. But God's like, I want it done this way. You're doing it, X, Y, Z. I want it done A, B, C. And sometimes we do that. So in some ways we do that. We'll get inspired, and that inspiration, we kind of run loose with it rather than turn to God saying, how can I help you? So, all right, second part, moving on. Still too many. Judges, chapter 7, 4-8. When the Lord said to Gideon, there are still too many troops. Take them down to the water, and I will test them for you there. If I say to you, this one can go with you, he can go. But if I say about anyone, this one cannot go with you, he cannot go with you. So he brought the troops down to the water, and the Lord said to Gideon, separate everyone who laps water with his tongue like a dog. Do the same with everyone who kneels to drink. The number of those who lapped with their hands and their mouths was 300. And all the rest were troops who knelt to drink of the water. The Lord said to Gideon, I will deliver you with 300 men who lapped who lapped and hand the Midianites over to you, but everyone else to go home. So Gideon sent all the Israelites to their tents, but kept the 300 troops who took the provisions and their ram's horns. The camp of Midian was below him in the valley. Okay, so what's the deal with the water? Well, I mean, really looking at the test, there's some conjecture as far as what exactly was going on here. Um, but since God didn't explain the reasons thoroughly, it's kind of speculative. The emphasis was on God's glory, not necessarily on the test. But most people tend to think that that those that just went down to the water and stuck their face in the water, and from a military strategist perspective, it would seem like you're oblivious to your surroundings when you do that. And doing that is where you're just down there drinking like a dog. You're not paying attention to those things around you, right? And those men who are cupping the water, bringing it to their face, they're still aware of their surroundings and what they're doing. And that's part that could speak to the fact that God always wants us to be vigilant in our faith and in our walk. And so the speculation is that that's what the test was about in that regard. Well, what we do know is God used a way to separate the men, and God was satisfied with just 300. So yeah, so he already got rid of what 22,000. He sent 22,000. Now he's down to 10,000. Of those 10,000, 300. And I'd be like, God, what are you doing? I don't understand. God, what are you doing? Just I got 300 guys, but I got 10,000 really, but Gideon was faithful to what the Lord was doing. So these men, he sent those to the tent, and he sent the 300 that he had, who took the provisions and their ram's horn, and they're getting ready to go off to fight. Bottom line. So, all right, question. When have you been part of a trust fall exercise, and what purpose is this kind of activity? I've never been part of those. I just never been part of a trust fall exercise. Maybe you have. And it's not that I didn't want to, or it's just something I never did. I've seen groups in these retreats and at work do these trust falls, and I understand the purpose behind those. And so, if we had to do it in Sunday school room, how many of the people would actually catch you, or how many of your church would actually catch you? Those kind of things. And it's all about trusting those when you fall. And so, in many regards, because of that question, Gideon is massively trusting God with this fall. And it wasn't a fall face forward or face backward. It was a leap of faith more than a trust fall. Gideon is trusting God with everything. I mean, he started out with, if got rid of 22,000, so he had 32,000 to begin with. And now he's down to 300, but okay, God, okay, Lord. Because there's nowhere showing where Gideon was mad with God. He didn't try to talk God and convince him to try to keep anybody, right? He trusted God completely, and that's big. All right, last question, and then we'll wrap up here. Judges, just right. Judges, chapter 7, 19-23. Gideon and the 100 men who were with him went to the outpost of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch. It's around midnight. After the sentries have been stationed, they blew their ram's horns and broke the pitchers that were in their hands. 3 companies blew their ram's horns and shattered their pitchers. They held their torches in their left hands and the ram's horns to show in their right hands. And they shouted, "A sword for the Lord and the sword for Gideon." Each Israelite took his position around the camp, and the entire Midianite army began to run. And they cried out as they fled. When the Gideon's men blew the 300 ram's horns, the Lord caused the men in the whole army to turn on each other with their horns, and they fled to Archaea house in the direction of Zerah as far as the border of Abel-Melon near Tabith. Then the men of Israel were called from Naphtali, Asher, and Massa, and they pursued the Midianites. All right, so look what's going on here. They cause confusion, right? And and now in today's tactics, we see that as it's not necessarily guerrilla warfare; it's just smart thinking. The camp was thoroughly confused, and this was around midnight, right after midnight, when all this took place. So most of the camp is asleep. They wake up, they're hearing all these horns and all this action, and people screaming. They're surrounded by the enemy. They don't know what to do. And they don't know what's behind them, what's forward, what's to the side. They're just surrounded by the enemy, and they're just going. These people are going crazy, right? They begin to run and cry out as they fled. They probably dropped their weapons, they dropped all their gear, they dropped all their possessions, and just took off. Every man for himself, and save your own life, save your own skin. So that's what happened. Now, just like God's example at Jericho, it wasn't so much that they had to or lay siege to the city of Jericho. Now they followed God's example and his instruction for 7 days. On the seventh day, they blew the horns as God had commanded, and the walls fell, right? So again, God is showing his people that you trust me, I can take care of you. You'll defeat any enemy that is before you, and you will be delivered, right? God is showing them once again, it's a cycle, that he is the one to be trusted. All right, last question here. How should knowing that God's acts in unpredictable ways impact how we live? Well, if we sit there and we truly say God is the God of impossible, we need to be prepared to believe that, do we not? In my opinion, if I sit here and say God is the God of the impossible, I'm saying that there's no possible way man's going to help me or help or heal someone, that I trust solely on God. If I pray to my God, I'm doing it with the expectation that he can do the impossible. This is plain and simple. He can do better than anything else that could happen. Now, can he use other people to service him and to give him glory? Yes, he can. But God is going to handle all this, and he's never going to handle it in a way that we think. And that's what makes it so beautiful and so glorious as to be a child of God, when we see that kind of stuff. All right, to summarize, believers dishonor God when they seek glory that belongs to him alone. Yes, we see that time and time again, do we not? Glory belongs to God. We know that from our church. We know that at Sunday school. We know that in our prayer life. Glory belongs to God. He's the one that saved us. He is the one that brought his son to the cross. He is the one that has given us salvation. We can't save ourselves. 2, believers need to trust that God's way of doing things is always best. Yes, they are. They may not be the best for you, but they may be the best, period. Now, you may be looking for healing, and you may be looking for something. You may be looking for money. You may be looking for some kind of relief. God's not ready to give that to you yet. Doesn't mean he doesn't love you. He's got better plans for you. Believers should pray for God to do what only he can do. So yeah, a believer should pray for God to do what only he can do. That's right, because only he can do it. Only he can heal. Only he can listen. Only he can rescue. Only he can deliver. Only he can save. So yeah, that's amazing stuff. So when we turn to God, we need to turn to him for everything, right? Just not for tomorrow, not for the big stuff. And don't think that, well, the little stuff he's not going to be bothered with. No, turn to him for everything. And when we do that, he is ready, willing, and able to do that. As we can see through stories, the Bible is replete with God revealing himself to us in so many ways that he desires that fellowship with us. He desires for us to be rescued. He desires for us to be in fellowship with him. Why would we not want to seek that ourselves, right? So anyway, appreciate y'all down there for another one of the videos. Again, I apologize for my voice. This past week's been kind of rough in regards to being under the weather. But hopefully next time I'll be okay. We'll be good to go. We'll rock from there. We'd love to have you here at Webb Baptist. We meet on Wednesday nights for our Bible study. Sunday mornings, we meet for our Sunday school classes, and then we go into our hour of worship in the sanctuary. And we'd love to have you here in the worship with us as our honored guest. If you cannot make it to Webb Baptist, by all means, get plugged into a Bible-based church wherever you're at and see what God has in store for you. I guarantee you that he has got something in store for you. He is waiting to bless you, and you will be a blessing to others as they will be a blessing to you in your church home. So by all means, get plugged in and find out what God's plan is for you, because I think it's very important, and you don't want to miss out. Be a part of something good. Be a part of God's family. Be a part of God's plan. Okay? Till next time, take care, and God bless.